Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and wrestling personalities about their lives in and out of the ring, doing acts of charity, community service, and helping others. And I've got a very special guest with me today. She has wrestled all over the world, done so many different things in the entertainment industry, and she's currently the cultural arts director for the Floyd Family Center for Social Equity. I'm very pleased to welcome Roni Nicole to the show. Welcome, Roni. It's nice to have you on.
Hi. Yes, and it's Ronnie, like
Ronnie.
Yes.
Okay. All right. No worries.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine. So let's kind of talk about your childhood. You grew up in North Texas?
I'm originally from Houston, Texas, yes, but I grew up between Texas and North Carolina. So I'm presently in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I grew up in Cary, North Carolina, in between. So my formative years were always traveling and being on the road with my mom and kind of seeing the southern U.S. through the backseat of 280Z. I'm showing my age. It was like an older car that was like fancy at the time, I guess. But but here, my family was always very involved in the community and providing mutual aid. I grew up primitive Southern Baptist, so being in the church and always going to see those who were sick and shut in was always, a part of the routine of my life. And my mom was always involved in some sort of volunteer work within the community. And so from a very young age, I was with her, learning how to help people and learning, about privilege and our responsibility and what we owe each other in terms of how we connect as a local community, but a global community as well. So I started out picking up clothes hangers at a thrift store she volunteered at because I was very young and that was all I could do at the time that they would trust me with. And then as I got a little bit older, I started helping out with like the toys. And then I moved up to be an actual volunteer. And by the time I was like 13 or 14, I was the one who was in charge of like orienting the youth volunteers and getting them into the swing of how things go. Even though I was so young, I had been there for so long, I knew how everything operated. And so I felt very fortunate to be in a community where that was so important, and helping each other was really at the forefront of what people did. It's odd to think about, but when I grew up, my grandma didn't lock her doors, because it was just the kind of place and time where it was safe, and I knew I couldn't do anything in front of the neighbors because they had the authority to make sure I was on the right path and not doing something out of character. So coming from a community that was always looking out for each other and helping each other and providing that aid to each other, that was instilled in me very young. And so transitioning into arts and finding a way to use arts and social justice and merge those two, which is actually more closely related than people think, that was just a natural progression for me.
I love how, it's fascinating to me that it all starts from the roots of someone's life, and you're able to get educated about that at such a young age. I think that if people started doing things like that when they're young, it'll help them propel themselves to doing more stuff as they're older, and it just passes on to the next generation and generation after that. So
absolutely.
So great.
Yes.
So great to hear that. Okay. So, you being interested in the arts and sports, obviously, sports entertainment, with wrestling. I mean, what got you interested in professional wrestling?
I've always been a wrestling fan from a very young age because, I'm no longer, but for a time, I was the youngest of my cousins there's like maybe a 10 to 12 year age gap between us. So, and then there's a 10 to 12 year age gap between my second set of cousins. So I'm in the middle of like this weird age range. But all of my older male cousins were involved in athletics and sports. And one of my cousins was a wrestler. And I would go to his high school wrestling matches and, you know, his collegiate matches and
Yeah,
whatnot,
yeah.
and see him perform. And it was just really engaging for me. And that was one of the few sports that actually I glommed on to. I played basketball when I was smaller, but it didn't ever grab me, you know, in the way that wrestling did.
Yeah.
And so when I started talking to him about wrestling, he was like, ask some of the boys at your school about wrestling. And I was like, because, you know, you're a kid, boys and girls at the time did not engage. So I was like, I'm not going to ask these boys. And the boys he was talking about were the ones who were wearing like the giant WWE t-shirts, you know? So I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
hang out with these kids. He's
Sure.
like, just ask them. So they were like, you need to, something's happening. You need to watch this. And they told me about Raw. And so at the time when I was growing up, I was not allowed to watch TV during the week. I was like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday until 6 p.m. thing.
Sure.
So I was like, I'm not allowed to watch TV during the week. And they were like, well, if you want to know what we're talking about, you need to figure it out. So
Back then, no social media, no YouTube. Any of
right.
that
And
stuff.
it's so funny to think about, like back then that it was talking to each other or passing notes or word of mouth where you heard about things, you know? And so luckily it worked out for me to sneak, and I stumbled and watched like the first episode of Raw. And I was just blown away. And I was like, this is the wrestling that I've seen before, but it's so much more theatrical and so much more, you know, majestic, and the pageantry and the artistry. And I just remember being so captivated by what I was seeing and thinking I could do this, but I didn't have any metric to understand it, like how you became a wrestler or anything like that. But even at that young age, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I'm quickly putting everything back because my mom's coming home and, you know, I don't want to get in trouble or whatever, but my mind is just like turning over these people that I saw. And like, I remember being actually like seeing Undertaker and Paul Bearer, like being scared, you know, and remembering how I felt then now. It makes me kind of emotional because how often do we actually get that first time feeling for certain things, you know?
Yeah.
But that, and I think also that's what draws me always back to wrestling, is that first time feeling and how it makes me still feel just on the inside so whole and warm and grateful to be able to participate in such a beautiful, brutal art. But yeah, so I didn't know how I was going to get into wrestling. And at the time, I was doing theater in middle school. And I figured that was my track because I wanted to be an actress and a fashion designer. I kind of wanted to have all the jobs that Barbie had.
Yeah.
I don't know why. But
so I didn't know.
Bad. Right. I mean, she was always employed and doing amazing things.
Yeah, exactly. Jack of all trades.
Right. But I got into high school, and we actually did have a really good wrestling team at my high school. And so I was like, oh. So I remember asking my health teacher, I was like, do you guys have girl wrestlers? And he was like, and he laughed. And I was like, huh, okay. So then I asked the female gym teacher, and she was like, you and another girl have expressed interest, but we don't have that, and we don't have the capability for that. Now, mind you, they did have women who had their own wrestling and stuff around the state of North Carolina. There was the opportunity for a small team to be built and to grow. But just at the time where this was, it was honestly a gender-based thing. You know, they didn't want to put the energy into that if they only had two girls who were interested in that, which really sucked, you know? So it wasn't until I had left college, and I had moved back up to the area to help my mom take care of my grandmother who was ill, and my mom was starting to decline in health as well. And so I left school and I was semi-pro cheerleading, and my team folded, and I was really disappointed. And so I was looking for another team to join, and I happened across a Craigslist ad that said female performers wanted. And back during that time, that could have went a couple different ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. But it turned out it was a gentleman who was trying to start a all-female based wrestling promotion here in North Carolina. So that was my introduction to indie wrestling here. And I was very taken by the idea of an organization that was all women that was doing wrestling. And it was exciting, and he was going to pay for all the training and make sure we got trained up. And so I ended up going down to Fayetteville, North Carolina, and training with Tony James at Ring Wars Carolina, and Eddie Brown, who was the owner. And I immediately caught the bug. So I remember riding with him and being very nervous. The very first time I went, it was only myself. And then each subsequent time, it was a different girl, because wrestling's hard, and it's hard to find people who, wanted to be dedicated.
Mm-hmm.
And usually when people take that first bump and they hit their head, it's going to go one of two ways. They're either like, no, I'm done with this, or I'm unsure, I didn't like it, but let's do it again. And I was the first, or I was the latter, because that first bump, it was bad. And I remember sitting up very slowly and seeing those little like specks in the dark and cartoon birds.
Yeah.
And like they were all kind of like waiting for me to quit. Like they were just paused, and I looked over and I was like, let's do it again. And they were like, okay. So I never stopped. And so I found my way into the independent scene and was fortunate enough to have some very cool old school vets to continue my training when I was unable to stay at RWC. So then I transferred over to the Fracture Factory, which is actually the school that's owned by C.W. Anderson's cousin. And so I was able to be trained by him and Chili Willy and Lou Marconi. And so I got a really good foundation in wrestling. And from there, it just took off. I've been, like you said, around the world. My longest stint was in Japan, where I actually moved and lived for over 4 years, which was an incredible experience. But, I feel very grateful to have been able to carry this dream to so many countries and to so many places and to so many people. I honestly did not envision my life being a pro wrestler.
No.
But that's the way it worked out, and I feel really grateful that it has.
Sure. So I wanted to switch gears and talk about, what you've been doing outside of the ring. You're currently the the cultural arts director for the Floyd Family Center for Social Equity. Tell me about how you got involved with that, because, obviously with COVID, 2020 was just, it was a mess.
Yes.
It was a mess. And the tragedy that just shocked the world, not just America, but the world with George Floyd, I was appalled just watching that.
That's what it is. That's what got me involved. George actually is from this area, but he moved up north. So he has family that's still here. His uncle and some family members still live in the Raleigh area. And so like I said, I was always raised to help, and I was by my grandparents, but my mom was big on injustice. And when you see something, when you can do something, you do it, because that's what you're supposed to do, especially if you have the capability. And I couldn't in any way bring George back, and that's not my responsibility.
Right.
But I could make sure that things change and do my part in making that change. And so I actually reached out to, at the time, most of the organizations were still using his name. That has since changed since his family asked for that to stop. But at the time, it was called the George Floyd Memorial Center, and they were having some events in Raleigh. And I just reached out to the family, and I told them, what I do and what I had been doing. I've been organizing, doing activism and cultural arts and event planning for quite a while. A lot of my life has been event planning and organizing, but I had gotten into the cultural arts when I started working for the Poor People's Campaign. And so I wanted to help. And so I reached out to the executive director of the center, Thomas McLaurin, who is George's cousin. And then I reached out to his uncle, Roger Floyd. And I asked if I could meet with them and just speak with them and tell them a bit about me and see how I could help. And honestly, that's how a lot of the people who are on the board and who are involved with the organization got there, is we all saw what happened and we all immediately felt the need to do something about it in whatever way we can.
Yeah.
And so after, joining up with them, my place became cultural arts because I'm an artist and I know how to kind of marry the two concepts together. People don't realize that arts and activism have always gone hand in hand.
Yeah, it has.
There was
Yes.
there was a time in the past when the United States actually funded artists. But then the Great Depression happened and artists started speaking out about the government. And so the government was like, we're going to take that funding back and y'all be quiet. And so a lot of artists were put on a list and deemed communist and like pretty much gaslit and doxxed in the way that you could back then. And so art and activism kind of looked like they were separate, but they weren't. A lot of those artists continued to still make art that spoke out against what happened, um, with the stock market crashing and everybody losing money, like the Great Depression was foreseen, which is essentially is what they were saying. And so bringing a way of a message of justice and equity and equality and shining a light on the evils of the world that we have to fight against was something I wanted to be able to do in a way that would affect more people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I got involved. We have had some amazing, incredible events. We had a conference, we've had a spoken word event, which was a really beautiful. All of the pieces, well, the first round pieces, because it was a contest, actually, a spoken word competition. The first round pieces were about George and his life and the legacy he left, which was really emotional and powerful for the family to be able to experience. Then we had a town hall where we actually spoke to law enforcement here in the area and had genuine, frank conversation about how y'all can do better and what can we as citizens do to help you do better. And that was really interesting for me. I am someone who believes that law enforcement has a place. The place is not our communities necessarily. Um, and so actually being able to be in the space to problem solve and to have frank discourse was really incredible. And so organizing these events, and our next big thing coming up is the Feeding the Spirit food pantry, because these people are acting like COVID is over, but it's really not. And with inflation, food is getting harder and harder to come by. And so we're really trying to make that more accessible here for those communities who kind of fall in the gap. A lot of places, pantries have started having requirements in order to come. And we just want to be a place where just come get the food so that you can feed yourself and your family. And so we are I'm organizing that right now. But yeah, just wanting to help, wanting to give back, and realizing that if we don't do it ourselves, it likely will not get done.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is.
So we have to be responsible for each other. We owe to each other to look out for each other and to care for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is how, I try to do that. I am also a member of WILF, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And we actually last night just had a One Wolf call, which is where our entire membership and anyone who's interested can come have guided discussions with guest speakers about different topics. And the big issue right now that we are trying to help and build solidarity for is all of the killings and the slayings that are happening in Iran for all of the protesters and all of the young people who are still protesting the death of Masha Amini when she was killed back in September.
Yeah.
By the morality police. I know it's snarky, but it's true.
Yeah,
guys.
There's a lot of craziness in the world, and so we all have to do our part to be better people and better as a community. Why do you feel it's important to be an activist and help out in your community?
We are actively every day in one way or another being fed something bad for us, whether that is literally through food or through what we watch on TV or our drinking water. We are literally deprived basic human rights that have been commodified so that we have to pay for things we're entitled to. And there are people who suffer under that more than others, and that is by design. And I believe it is important to help push back against that so that they know we are not ones to be messed with. We are going to continue to fight for each other, for our communities, to have equity, to have reasonable pay, to have safe places to live, to have clean drinking water, to have opportunity for all children of all color. It's important to never stop fighting. And I believe that is why it's important for me to be an activist, because I've been given the ability and the capacity to fight. And so I want to do that to protect people who I don't even know, but they deserve to be protected from being disenfranchised and being lied to and being gaslit into thinking things aren't happening the way that they are. I think that's wrong. And I would hope that everybody who saw something wrong would choose to say no in their own way. You don't have to be an activist, but there are still ways that you can say no and you can give back and you can show your power and use your voice. And I encourage everyone to do that in whatever way they can, because it's important for us to continue to make sure we're not overtaken by capitalistic corporate overlords. But yeah.
Hey, Roni, this has been wonderful talking with you. Where can people find you on social media? Do you have a website? Any events coming up, wrestling or not? Where can people find more about you?
Well, yes, please like my page on Facebook, Roni Nicole /Big Bang Nicole. You can find me on Twitter at Glitterlicious, spelled just how it sounds. You can find me on Instagram at Roni_Nicole_Joshi Queen. And you can find my Linktree at Linktree/thingy Roni Nicole R. And what's happening is actually something that is happening on January 13th, today. My book is out. So it has been released on Amazon in both ebook and paperback format. Okay. It is called River Song Respite Reflections 1. I went to this incredible retreat space here in the Piedmont area called Respite in the Round. It is a rare alluvial forest. So it's like a hardwood forest that's off the Tar River, and it's on Occaneechi-Saponi land. And it's a space where you can heal and ground and connect with nature. And so in the wake of losing my mother, I have sought to do that in different ways through my grieving process. And so this book is a book of reflections and poetry that I wrote while I was there. And so, yes, that is actually, I received the email, the paperback went live like while we were talking. So I'm super excited.
Congratulations.
So, yes, thank you. So please check me out, Roni Nicole, on the author's page for Amazon, and you can find the link on most of my social media as well. And I'm actually in audition season for theater, so I have paused my wrestling bookings, but I will be resuming those in Europe coming this spring and summer. So super excited. Okay. So all my European fans, please follow my social media so you can see updates about my European tour, because this is the first time I'm putting a tour together by myself, which is crazy, but I'm excited, and there's so many people who I want to see and work with. So it's time to get back out there. So please stay tuned for more wrestling info. But right now, go get my book if you can.
All right. You got a lot of big projects in the works. And again, I just want to say thank you for coming on. It means a lot to me and the viewers watching at home. And I'd love to have you back on sometime soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Take care.
This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.